The galaxy was a vast expanse, filled with an array of species, each with its own culture, history, and way of life. Among them, the Veldrians stood out as the paragons of peace. For centuries, they had followed a strict doctrine of non-aggression. Their society was built on cooperation, harmony, and a deep belief that any conflict could be resolved through understanding and dialogue. Wars were a relic of the past in their eyes, something too primitive, too costly. And so they had chosen to observe rather than intervene, always standing as neutral arbiters in the galactic stage. But now, something had changed. Tensions were rising. The Galactic Council had convened for an emergency meeting, its chambers buzzing with anxious murmurs. There had been whispers of rogue factions stirring in the outer rim, of political powers on the brink of war. While most of the council members sat in a silent standoff, unwilling to make the first move, the Veldrians were growing increasingly restless. They could no longer stay passive observers. The very fabric of the galaxy seemed to be unraveling, and the threat was closing in fast. In the center of the council hall, the Veldrian ambassador, Lorena, stood solemnly, her silken robes catching the soft light of the meeting room. Her species was famed for their calm demeanor, but today there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. The rising violence in the galaxy was a storm on the horizon, and the Veldrians were struggling to stay afloat in its wake. "I've heard reports from all sectors," Lorena began, her voice carrying the quiet weight of authority. "There are forces, growing bolder by the day, seeking to disrupt the peace we've worked so hard to maintain. There are whispers of war, and no one seems willing to step forward and stop it." Her voice faltered slightly, the words heavy with the gravity of what she was suggesting. For a species who had long believed peace was an achievable goal, the very notion of conflict was anathema. But the signs were unmistakable. Wars, skirmishes, and brutal takeovers were spreading like wildfire across the galaxy, and the Veldrians knew they could not remain isolated forever. The human delegation, seated across from the Veldrian representatives, listened intently. The humans had only recently been introduced to the council and were still regarded by many as unpredictable, even dangerous. Their species, born from a history of warfare and conquest, had left a deep impression on the galaxy. They were known for their ambition, their hunger for knowledge, and their unmatched adaptability. Many in the council feared what the humans might do if they ever decided to take sides in the growing conflict. Yet there was something else in the humans' eyes, something the Veldrians couldn't quite place. "They have a different way of dealing with these problems," Lorena thought, watching the human ambassador, a woman named Captain Mara Connors, as she observed the proceedings with quiet intensity. Unlike most species, humans were not content to simply avoid conflict. They were willing to fight, but not for conquest, not for domination, but for something far more complex: protection. The Veldrians had watched humanity in action, heard of their infamous ability to overcome insurmountable odds, to rise from the ashes of destruction time and time again. Lorena had to admit, something about the humans' approach intrigued her. If there was one thing the Veldrians understood, it was that peace required strength. Perhaps in humanity, they could find a partner, someone who could stand with them, not to avoid conflict, but to ensure that when peace was threatened, it would be protected at all costs. Yet, even as these thoughts swirled in her mind, Lorena could not ignore the warning that gnawed at her. Could they, the most peaceful species in the galaxy, afford to take a step toward something as dangerous as an alliance with the humans? As the murmurs of the council continued, Lorena knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was on the brink of something far greater than anyone had anticipated. And whether they liked it or not, the Veldrians would have to decide soon whether to remain passive or to step into the storm, with the humans by their side. The first contact had been anything but smooth. A human vessel, the Adventurer, had strayed into Veldrian space while conducting a deep space survey. The human explorers, unaware of the exact boundaries of Veldrian territory, had triggered a silent alarm on the Veldrian flagship. Immediately, the Veldrians dispatched a diplomatic envoy to meet the foreign ship, expecting nothing more than a standard greeting. But what they found aboard the Adventurer was not what they expected. Captain Mara Connors, a woman in her mid-30s with fiery red hair and a sharp gaze, was leading the human delegation. Despite her species' reputation for impulsive actions and reckless bravery, Connors carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had seen the vastness of space and survived the darkest corners of it. She didn't seem intimidated by the sleek, imposing Veldrian ships that surrounded them. Instead, she stepped forward confidently, as if the situation were just another day at the office. Lorana, the Veldrian ambassador, watched as Connors approached her with a polite smile. There was something disarming about the human, something that transcended the usual bravado. "I believe we've made a wrong turn, Ambassador," Connors said, her voice steady, her eyes scanning the assembly of Veldrian diplomats. "But I assure you, we mean no harm, just a bit of accidental wanderlust." Lorana blinked, momentarily taken aback by the human's casual tone. But then, in the back of her mind, a quiet realization began to settle in. Humans were far more unassuming than the council reports had suggested. They weren't just opportunistic, war-hungry creatures, as many believed. They were explorers. They were curious. And above all, they were pragmatic. Lorana cleared her throat. "You've wandered quite far from human territory," she remarked, her voice cold but not unkind. "Do you know where you are, Captain Connors?" Connors didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "Not exactly. But I know we're on a peaceful mission. We didn't mean to intrude, and we're happy to comply with any protocols necessary." The Veldrians, by nature, were a species that valued calm, controlled exchanges. They believed that all matters, no matter how complex, could be solved with patience and respect. But the human's presence was unsettling in a way they couldn't place. There was an undercurrent of energy that seemed to hum from every human on board the Adventurer, an energy the Veldrians couldn't quite decipher. Lorana's team began working quickly to establish communications with the human vessel, preparing for a diplomatic solution. It was a standard procedure, one that Lorana had done countless times before, but something was different today. The room felt charged with anticipation. The human captain stood by, watching the Veldrians work. It was clear that the humans had no intention of causing a scene. But as the Veldrians reviewed the situation, it became apparent that there was one thing the humans had overlooked. Their ship, though impressive, was poorly equipped for anything beyond exploration. It lacked the standard defensive systems that most galactic vessels carried. Just as the Veldrians prepared to make their next move, an unexpected blip appeared on the ship's scanners. A rogue faction of space pirates had emerged from the nearby asteroid field, weapons primed and targeting the Adventurer. Lorana felt a knot form in her stomach. It was a typical move from these pirates. Strike first, ask questions later. Before the Veldrians could react, Captain Connors did something they hadn't anticipated. She issued a command to her crew. "Engage defensive protocols," she ordered. The crew moved swiftly, activating shields and locking down weapon systems. But instead of launching an all-out assault, they targeted the pirate ship's engines, rendering them immobile without causing mass destruction. Within minutes, the pirates were captured, their vessel helpless. The human ship had acted with precision. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Lorana saw the Veldrians' own fleet pause, unsure how to proceed. They fight with restraint, Lorana thought, stunned. Humans were not engaging in a show of force for dominance, but rather protecting their own while minimizing damage. There was no overwhelming desire for revenge, just calculated efficiency. For a species so young and inexperienced in galactic politics, the humans had an uncanny ability to maintain control in the face of potential chaos. Captain Connors turned to Lorana with a slight grin. "Nothing we can't handle," she said, as though fending off a pirate attack was no more difficult than a routine repair. Lorana stood in silence, her mind racing. The humans were not just warriors. They were something more. Could it be that the Veldrians, the galaxy's champions of peace, had something to learn from these unpredictable, audacious humans? The room grew still. There was no turning back now. Lorna knew that whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. The meeting between the Veldrian delegation and Captain Mara Connors had left an indelible mark on Lorna's mind. She had never seen such restrained power, such willingness to protect without the desire to conquer. The human crew had displayed a strength and strategic intelligence she hadn't anticipated. And yet there was something more beneath the surface that gnawed at her curiosity. The following day, Lorna requested a private audience with Captain Connors, eager to understand what lay behind this curious species. The human captain had agreed, her tone polite but tinged with an unspoken urgency. There was much she wanted to share, but only with the right audience. In a quiet chamber aboard the Veldrian flagship, the two women sat across from each other, the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressing down on them. The conversation began with pleasantries, but it quickly turned to the heart of the matter. "Captain, I have seen the strength of your people," Lorna began carefully. "But what I fail to understand is how a species with such a violent past can become so different. How can you, who have fought wars and devastated each other for centuries, now stand for peace?" Connors's face softened at the question, her expression thoughtful. There was no defensiveness, no hesitation, only a deep, knowing look. The human captain shifted slightly in her seat, her gaze steady and resolute. "We've paid the price of violence," she said, her voice quiet but full of gravity. "Every civilization has its dark days. Ours is no different. We fought wars that tore apart entire continents. We destroyed the very things we held dear, our families, our cities, our homes. But with every war, we learned something more important than victory. We learned how to rebuild. We learned that peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from understanding it, from growing stronger through the struggle." Lorna listened intently. Humanity's past was something the Veldrians had heard of in passing: wars, famine, destruction. But hearing it from Connors herself gave the story a weight that made it impossible to ignore. There was a quiet power in her words, one that made Lorna pause and reconsider everything she thought she knew about humanity. "But your wars," Lorna pressed, her voice almost a whisper. "They were not small skirmishes. You fought total destruction. How could your species ever come to understand peace after such devastation?" Connors looked away for a moment, her eyes reflecting a history of personal loss and collective suffering. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but filled with a quiet sadness. "We didn't come to peace easily," she said softly. "We fought against ourselves for centuries, pushing until we had nothing left but rubble. But it was in those darkest hours that we discovered something else: resilience. It wasn't until we learned to protect what mattered most, to build our societies not on the spoils of war, but on the lessons of survival, that we began to understand what true peace is." The silence between them was thick. Lorna felt a wave of respect she hadn't expected. The Veldrians had always believed peace was something to be maintained through avoidance, through quiet observation and diplomacy. But humanity's approach was different. Peace was not something you waited for. It was something you fought for, something you forged through every hardship. "Is that why you helped us defend ourselves?" Lorna asked. "When the pirates attacked, you didn't come to conquer. You came to protect. You could have easily destroyed them. Why didn't you?" Connors smiled slightly, though there was no mirth in her expression. "Because we're not like the pirates. We don't fight for dominance, Ambassador. We fight to protect others. We fight to ensure that those who cannot defend themselves have someone who will." The words hit Lorna harder than she expected. The Veldrians had always believed that strength came from keeping the peace, avoiding any and all conflict. But here was a species that had learned the most important lesson of all. True strength lies not in the avoidance of conflict, but in the courage to face it, to stand up and protect those who cannot protect themselves. The realization was like a revelation to Lorna. She had always believed that peace was a state of nonviolence, a quiet existence unmarred by strife. But humanity's strength came not from the absence of conflict. It came from the very willingness to engage in battle, not for conquest, but for the preservation of peace. As the conversation continued, Lorena's mind was ablaze with new questions. What would it look like if the Veldrians embraced this mindset? Could the galaxy be better protected if peace was not only sought after, but fought for when needed? For the first time in her life, Lorena felt a shift within her. Perhaps the Veldrians had been wrong all along. Peace was not about avoidance. It was about the strength to protect what mattered, no matter the cost. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Veldrians would never see humanity the same way again. The galaxy's fragile balance was crumbling faster than anyone had anticipated. The political situation had grown more unstable by the day. Factions once considered allies now eyed each other with suspicion, their tensions pushing them to the brink of war. But even in the face of these growing hostilities, the Veldrians held fast to their ideals. They believed peace could still be achieved if only diplomacy prevailed. That was, until the latest threat arrived. A ruthless warlord, Azulon the Red, had seized control of a key sector, brutally wiping out entire colonies in his bid to expand his territory. His forces, outfitted with advanced weaponry and ruthless tactics, made him a nearly insurmountable foe. No one had dared challenge him. No one except the humans. When news of Azulon's assault reached the Veldrians, their leadership convened again. The situation was dire, and Lorena felt the weight of their indecision pressing down on her. The Veldrians could send a fleet to intervene, but their forces were primarily defensive, designed to protect and mediate, not to engage in full-scale combat. The warlord would crush them easily. There was, however, another option: the humans. In a tense meeting between the Veldrians and the human delegation, Captain Connors stood confidently, her arms folded across her chest. "We've already sent a task force to the sector," she said. "We'll strike hard and fast. Our goal is simple: neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary destruction. We'll protect the colonies, but we're not here to raze everything to the ground." Lorena listened closely, her mind still reeling from the sheer audacity of humanity's response. This wasn't just a tactical operation. It was an entirely different philosophy. The humans had learned long ago that peace was about protection, not the imposition of will. They weren't interested in conquering Azulon's territory or expanding their own. Their focus was on saving the innocents caught in the crossfire. But even so, it was risky. Could a human-led mission really succeed where others had failed? "Are you certain this will work?" Lorena asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Azulon's forces are vast, and he's known for his brutal methods. How can you guarantee that your approach won't lead to greater destruction?" Connors met her gaze directly. "We won't win by fighting fire with fire. We'll use strategy, disrupt his supply lines, hit his leadership, but avoid civilian casualties at all costs. There are other ways to win a war without burning everything down." The Veldrians, who had long prided themselves on their peaceful neutrality, were hesitant. Could they trust this species, with its violent history and reputation, to execute a mission that aligned with their own values? To fight without destroying? Could they rely on the humans to lead the charge for peace? The answer came sooner than they expected. Within days, the human fleet arrived in the contested sector. The first reports were nothing short of astounding. The adventurer, leading the charge, engaged Azulon's forces with a precision that was as calculated as it was devastating. Rather than launching indiscriminate attacks, the humans systematically dismantled the warlord's operations, crippling his fleet, cutting off his resources, and isolating his forces without causing widespread destruction. The Veldrians watched in awe as the humans worked seamlessly to neutralize Azulon's weapons facilities, liberating colonies without losing a single civilian life. The battle wasn't won with sheer force, but with cunning and precision, using the enemy's own weaknesses against them. It was a masterful display of non-lethal tactics, an approach the Veldrians had long advocated. yet had never fully realized in practice. Lorna couldn't tear her eyes away from the live feed, stunned by the humans' restraint and ingenuity. They had not come to conquer. They had come to save. And in doing so, they proved something she hadn't allowed herself to believe before. Sometimes peace required action. Sometimes peace required fighting. The final blow to Azulon came not with a devastating weapon, but with the tactical brilliance of a small human team who infiltrated his command center, captured him, and broadcasted his surrender to the galaxy. It was a blow to his morale more devastating than any bomb could have been. His forces crumbled. As the mission came to a close, Connors' voice came over the comms, calm and confident. "We've done what we set out to do. The colonies are safe, and Azulon is defeated. We can leave the sector in peace now, knowing we didn't become what we were fighting against." Lorna's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had witnessed something extraordinary. A species that had faced unimaginable loss, a species whose history was steeped in war, had just delivered peace in a way no one else could. It was then that the full weight of their potential hit her. The humans weren't just a species of warriors. They were protectors, using their strength not for domination, but for preservation. The Veldrians, for the first time in centuries, faced a question they had never dared to ask themselves. Could the galaxy's most peaceful species learn from those who had fought for peace, not by avoiding war, but by conquering it for the right reasons? Lorna felt the storm coming. She wasn't sure how long they could stay in the eye of it, but one thing was clear. Humanity had proven its place in the galaxy, and the Veldrians, for better or worse, had to face the truth. They had a choice now. Would they stand by and watch, or would they step forward, alongside humanity, to build a future that fought for peace? The galaxy was changing, and it was hard to ignore the weight of that truth. The aftermath of Azulon's defeat reverberated through the council chambers, sending shockwaves across systems that had once believed themselves safe from the chaos that seemed to seep from every corner of space. What had once been seen as a fleeting alliance between the Veldrians and humans was beginning to morph into something more significant, a partnership forged in the fires of shared responsibility. For the first time, Lorna found herself reconsidering the Veldrians' role in the galaxy. Could their long-standing neutrality truly be maintained in a galaxy spiraling into turmoil? The humans, once considered unpredictable and dangerous, had proven themselves not only capable of protecting others, but of doing so in a way that aligned with the ideals of peace the Veldrians had long held. Yet the gulf between the two species remained, one of experience, of history, of culture. Despite the success of the human-led mission, the Veldrians could not ignore the larger picture. The galaxy's instability had grown worse, not better. The factions that had once bickered in the shadows were now forming alliances of their own. Alliances built on mutual distrust and shared ambition. If the Veldrians were to stand any chance of protecting the peace they so dearly cherished, they would need allies. But could they trust humanity fully, or was there something darker beneath the surface? Lorna sought answers, her steps heavy as she made her way to the briefing room. As she entered, she was greeted by a familiar face, Captain Connors, who had become something of a constant presence in the council discussions. There was a quiet confidence about her now, one that radiated not just from her military successes, but from the way she carried herself with every word and every gesture. "Ambassador." Connors greeted her with a polite nod, her face unreadable but calm. "I was hoping we could talk. You're thinking about the larger picture, aren't you?" Lorna paused, surprised by the directness of the statement. "You've read my mind," she replied, taking a seat across from the human captain. "The victory over Azulon was a significant step, but I fear it's only the beginning of something much larger. The galaxy is splintering, and I don't know if we can continue standing by as passive observers. There are forces at work that we've never encountered before, and they're far more dangerous than we imagined." Connors leaned back, her fingers steepled in front of her as she studied the Veldrian ambassador. "That's the truth," she said, voice laced with quiet understanding. The warlord was a symptom of a much deeper issue. The peace you've worked so hard to protect is eroding, and if we don't act together, it will fall apart completely. Lorana's eyes narrowed, sensing that Connors wasn't just speaking from a place of observation, but of experience. The humans, she realized, were not only survivors, they were also visionaries, seeing the larger picture where others only saw immediate threats. We can't do it alone, Lorana admitted, a rare vulnerability in her voice. We can no longer rely on the hope that peace will simply return. If the Veldrians are to protect this galaxy, we must adapt. We must be willing to fight, not just for diplomacy, but for survival. Connors nodded slowly, the weight of the words sinking in. And that's where we come in. We've learned the hard way that peace requires action. Sometimes that means standing with others, fighting for what's right, even when it seems like the odds are stacked against you. There was a long silence as Lorana processed the implications of what Connors was saying. The decision before her now was monumental. Would the Veldrians join humanity in taking a more active role in shaping the galaxy's future, or would they retreat further into the shadows, hoping the storm would pass? Lorana knew the galaxy was no longer the same place it had been. The Veldrians could not remain on the sidelines, watching from afar as the warlords, pirates, and corrupt factions grew more powerful. But was the human way, their willingness to engage, to fight for peace, truly the path they should follow? There's something I need to ask, Lorana said, her tone suddenly serious. The humans, you fought, bled, and rebuilt over centuries. But are you prepared to fight for others, those who are not human? Are you willing to risk your lives not just for your species, but for the galaxy itself? Connors' eyes flickered with something unreadable. The real question is, Ambassador, are you? Lorana felt her pulse quicken at the weight of Connors' words. The time for hesitation was over. The galaxy was changing, and the Veldrians could no longer sit idly by. They had to choose. To evolve, to fight alongside humanity, or to remain a relic of a bygone era. She exhaled, a deep, steady breath. Then we stand together, she said, her voice firm with the resolve she had only just begun to recognize within herself. It was a decision that would shape the fate of the galaxy. And with that, the Veldrians and humans stepped into a new chapter, side by side, ready to face the storm together. The decision had been made. The Veldrians and humans were now bound by more than just a fragile alliance. They had chosen to stand together, to fight not only for their own survival, but for the galaxy as a whole. The weight of that commitment settled heavily on Lorana's shoulders. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of all-out war, and the alliance between the two species would soon be tested in ways neither could fully anticipate. The first mission under their newfound alliance came swiftly. A massive fleet, led by a coalition of systems sympathetic to the growing instability, had mobilized near the Arcturus belt. They were positioning themselves to make a significant strike against the Veldrian core worlds. It wasn't just a military attack, it was a calculated message. The Veldrians had overstayed their time of peace, and now it was time for them to step aside. The intelligence was clear. This was no random coalition. Behind it was a new, insidious faction that had quietly risen from the ashes of the pirate uprisings and rogue warlords, the Harrowed Dominion. An amalgamation of various militant groups, they had only one goal: galactic domination. With a mix of advanced weaponry, mercenaries, and war-hardened factions, the Dominion had become a growing threat that even the most established empires feared to confront. Lorana stared at the briefing hologram, her brow furrowed. The odds of success seemed impossible, yet the choices were stark. If they didn't act quickly, the Veldrian systems would fall first, followed by the others. The Dominion's reach was spreading rapidly, and if left unchecked, it would consume everything in its path. She stood beside Captain Connors, whose demeanor was one of steely resolve. The human captain didn't flinch even as the situation grew dire. This was no longer about diplomacy. This was war, and it was time for the humans and Veldrians to prove their worth together. "It's a high-risk operation," Lorna said quietly, studying the formation of their forces. "If we don't act now, their fleet will overrun the Veldrian defenses in a matter of days. We can't afford to wait." Connors nodded, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "We've got the upper hand with our mobility and speed. We can hit them before they even realize what's happening. But we need to be precise. No unnecessary casualties. We have to neutralize their command structure, cut the head off the snake." The plan was risky, but it was the only one that could work. The human and Veldrian forces would launch a dual strike, one attack to distract and weaken the enemy's outer defenses, while the other, a smaller, more elite force, infiltrated the Dominion flagship. The goal was to disable the Dominion leadership, destabilize their command, and leave their forces vulnerable. It was a delicate balance of power, and there was no room for failure. As the joint forces prepared for the assault, Lorna felt the weight of the responsibility fall squarely on her shoulders. She wasn't just a diplomat anymore. She was a general in a war she hadn't wanted, yet was now fully committed to. The alliance with humanity had been forged out of necessity, but now it was more than that. It was personal. They had proven themselves in battle. The humans didn't fight for glory or conquest. They fought for survival, and for others. Lorna's thoughts were interrupted as Connors approached her, her face serious, but not without a trace of warmth. "We're ready," Connors said, her eyes steady. "I've never trusted anyone more than I do right now. We've got this together." Lorna nodded, a sense of unity rising within her. For the first time, she understood what the humans truly meant by fighting for others. It wasn't just about defending your own. It was about standing side by side with those who needed help, no matter the odds. And now, the Veldrians and humans were doing just that. The moment of truth arrived. The fleet of Veldrian and human ships cut through the stars, their ships synchronized and precise. The assault began, a swift and deadly ballet of maneuvering and tactics. The Dominion's forces were blindsided by the unexpected strike, their defenses crumbling faster than they could respond. The real test, however, was the infiltration. A small team of elite human and Veldrian soldiers, including Lorna herself, had boarded a stealth vessel, making their way to the heart of the Dominion flagship. It was a high-stakes mission: get to the command center, disable the leadership, and escape before the entire fleet retaliated. As the team neared their objective, the tension was palpable. Every step felt like it could be their last, every shadow a potential threat. But Lorna knew one thing: she was no longer fighting alone. This wasn't just a battle for her people or for humanity. It was a battle for the galaxy. With the Dominion's flagship in their sights, the Veldrians and humans prepared for their final strike. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and for the first time in history, they stood united as one. The Dominion flagship loomed ahead like a fortress of shadow in the vast emptiness of space, its massive, jagged structure rippling with energy. Inside, the halls echoed with the footsteps of the elite team that had infiltrated the heart of the beast. Lorna, her pulse quickening, moved silently through the dimly lit corridors, her senses heightened by the weight of the mission. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines, a constant reminder that the clock was ticking. The team, comprised of Veldrian warriors and human soldiers, including Connors herself, moved with purpose. Every member had a specific task: disable the ship's primary systems, neutralize any threats, and most importantly, capture or eliminate the Dominion leaders. The stakes were clear. If they failed, the Dominion's reinforcements would destroy the rest of the Allied forces in orbit, and their fleet would make its way to the Veldrian core worlds, sealing the galaxy's fate. Lorna's mind raced as she scanned the darkened hallways. Her thoughts were a blur of strategy, responsibility, and the lives of those counting on her. She was no longer just an ambassador. She was a soldier, and her decisions now carried the weight of life and death. The team reached the command center, a massive, reinforced room at the heart of the flagship. The door was sealed, but it was no match for the human engineering team's advanced tech. With a quiet whir, the blast door slid open, revealing the Dominion leaders gathered around a central holotable, deep in discussion. Lorna's breath caught as she took in the sight of them. The harrowed Dominion's leadership was a collection of the most feared warlords and tacticians the galaxy had ever known. They were ruthless, cunning, and brutal. This would be no easy confrontation. Connors motioned for the team to hold, her eyes scanning the room. "We've got one shot at this," she whispered. "We disable their comms, take out the leadership, and we get out. No mistakes." With a nod from Lorena, the team moved in swiftly, weapons raised. There was no turning back now. The first shot rang out, a sharp crack that silenced the room, as a Veldrian warrior incapacitated the nearest guard with a quick, precise strike. In the chaos, Lorena and Connors rushed toward the center of the room, where the Dominion leaders were caught off guard. Their eyes widened in disbelief, but it was too late. The Veldrian forces had already taken positions, sealing the room and cutting off all escape routes. "Everyone down. Now," Connors commanded. The remaining Dominion leaders, now realizing the scale of the threat, hesitated for a moment before making a desperate attempt to flee. But Lorna had anticipated that. She moved to the front, blocking their escape, her voice cold and commanding. "You're not leaving here alive unless you surrender," she said firmly, her tone unwavering. "This is your only chance." The head of the Dominion leadership, a tall, silver-haired warlord named Draxus, sneered at her. His eyes burned with malice. "You think you've won, Veldrian," he spat. "Even if you kill us, our forces are already preparing to crush your allies. The war is not over. It's just beginning." Lorena met his gaze without flinching. "This is where it ends. For all of you." Connors stepped forward, her voice equally firm. "You've underestimated us. This isn't just a fight for survival anymore. This is a fight for the future of the galaxy, and we're not going to let you burn it all to the ground." Without warning, the team moved into action, securing the leadership while their tech specialist worked to disable the ship's central systems. The energy in the room shifted. What had once been a battle of wits now became one of pure survival. The Dominion's leadership was effectively neutralized, but they weren't out of the fight just yet. A commotion from the far side of the room signaled that reinforcements were on their way. "Back to the ship. Now," Connors barked. Lorena turned to run, but her mind was a whirl of thoughts. They had captured the Dominion leaders, but their forces were still out there. The fight was far from over. They had won a significant victory, but the battle for the galaxy was still raging. As she sprinted down the corridor toward the escape route, Lorena found herself wondering, was this the turning point? The humans had shown her what it meant to fight for peace, but now, with the Dominion leaders captured and their forces falling apart, it seemed that humanity's involvement was not only essential, it was inevitable. They reached the extraction point, and Lorena's heart pounded in her chest. The stealth ship was waiting, engines ready for takeoff. As the team boarded, Connors locked eyes with her. "We've got this," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "Together." As the ship shot off into the blackness of space, Lorena looked back at the warship that had been the center of the Dominion's power. They had taken the heart of the beast, and now the galaxy would know that the tide had turned. The humans and Veldrians had fought as one, and it was a victory that would echo across every system. The harrowed Dominion had lost its grip. But the war was far from over. The galaxy was still on the edge, and the true test of their alliance had only just begun. The aftermath of the Dominion's defeat echoed across the galaxy like a tremor felt deep in the bones of every system. The capture of their leadership was a symbolic victory, but it was not the end. The harrowed Dominion's forces scattered like a headless hydra, but they remained dangerous, fractured, and desperate. The war was far from over, and the galaxy's fragile peace was yet to be secured. Back at the Veldrian Council Station, the alliance was beginning to take shape. The joint fleet had returned, battered but triumphant. It had been a victory earned in blood and sacrifice. Yet, as Lorna stood before the War Council, the weight of what they had accomplished, and what still needed to be done, loomed larger than ever. "The Dominion's leadership is gone," Lorna began, her voice calm but resolute. "But their forces are not completely defeated. We cannot afford to rest on this victory alone. We need to expand our influence, secure our allies, and bring the galaxy's fractured systems together before the remnants of the Dominion regroup." Captain Connors, standing beside her, added with quiet determination, "We can't do it alone. The humans are ready to continue standing with you, Veldrians, but we need to make sure this isn't just a battle won. It has to be the first step toward rebuilding." The room hummed with the murmurs of the council members. Some Veldrians were still hesitant to trust humanity fully, despite their shared victory. Others recognized the need for a more assertive stance. One voice rose above the rest, that of Elder Ceylon, a council member who had once been a staunch advocate for neutrality. "I have seen the strength of the humans on the battlefield," Elder Ceylon said, her voice measured. "We have learned from them, and they have learned from us. But we cannot pretend that the galaxy will simply fall into line because we want it to. The Dominion's forces will regroup, and others will rise in their place. The question is not if we fight again, but when." Lorna's gaze hardened. "We must be proactive, not reactive. The human perspective has shown us that peace requires not just diplomacy, but the willingness to act decisively when needed. We must establish a new order, an order that brings together the systems who seek peace and stability." Connors nodded, adding, "We need to form a new coalition, a defense network that will make it clear to any would-be conquerors that the galaxy is united. It's not about fighting for dominance. It's about fighting for the freedom of every system." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. The idea of such a coalition was unprecedented, but it was becoming increasingly clear that only the unified front would be capable of preventing the galaxy from falling into chaos once again. Lorna turned to face the room, her voice ringing with authority. "We will no longer be passive observers. We will take the initiative and form the first true galactic alliance in centuries. We will be the shield against those who would divide us, and we will not stand alone. Humanity has shown us that true strength lies in unity." As the council members began to nod in agreement, a ripple of hope spread throughout the room. This was the turning point, the moment when the galaxy could begin to heal and rebuild. But Lorna knew that the work had only just begun. The Dominion was a mere symptom of a much larger issue. The galaxy was fractured, and it would take time, trust, and sacrifice to mend it. Outside the council chamber, the stars continued to shine with the same indifferent brilliance. The universe didn't care about alliances, about wars or peace treaties. It simply existed, indifferent to the struggles of the creatures who inhabited it. Yet, for the first time in generations, Lorna saw a glimmer of something new, a chance to shape the future, to forge a galaxy where peace wasn't just a distant hope, but a tangible reality. She walked alongside Connors as they left the chamber. "Do you think we can make it work?" Lorna asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the stars. Connors smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. "If there's one thing I've learned from humanity, it's that nothing worth having comes easy. But if we work together, really work together, we can make it happen, one step at a time." Lorna's heart swelled with a rare optimism. She had never truly believed in the idea of unity before. But now, standing side by side with humanity, she felt something shifting inside her. They were no longer two species bound by necessity. They were partners in something larger, a shared dream of a galaxy where peace could endure. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but the seeds of a new era had been planted. The galaxy might be broken, but together, the humans and Veldrians would work to rebuild it, one system at a time. And with that, they stepped into the future, ready to face whatever came next.